I'm John Travis in Mullumbimby, New South Wales, that's in Australia, on the 4th of December, 2020, talking to Shakti Pearce, who actually lives a mile from where I live in California, on the 3rd of December. And we are having to record the audio via phone. So if there's some lip syncing problems, or if you see an extra thing on your screen, we're getting around the technical challenges of bad internet audio. And Shakti, I've known you for what, 30, not quite 30 years. You were actually babysitting my daughter when we first moved to Virginia in '96. So what, you would have been about 12? I feel your age. About. And it was your father that invited us to Thanksgiving dinner, 24 years ago. We were new in the area, and I had met him at a conference earlier, so we knew each other, and it was the beginning of a lifelong, in his case, friendship. I saw him just a few weeks before he died, and unfortunately, my efforts to capture him on video were frustrating. I think you came in once when we were doing it and you were telling stories on him, but couldn't get him to talk about his life as much as his work, which is fascinating. So today I'm excited to know that you're picking up his work, that you're actually rereading his books, and following in his footsteps, which I'm sure he's delighted, would be delighted to know if consciousness does persist. Regardless, all of us who have gained so much from his work are delighted that you're going to be continuing it and adding your own perspective. So I'm going to start with your early childhood, how you were influenced by your father, and probably get some stories about him as well. But let's start back in whenever it was. I won't reveal the date. How you happened to come into this most amazing family.
Yes. Well, I came into the world in pretty much exactly the way that Joe describes in his books. And he and my mom and his my father had a previous family of 4 siblings who were much older than I am, and unfortunately his first wife passed away when his children were young, when his first 4 children were young. He married my mom much later. So he and my mom moved to Virginia to build a homestead, basically to get away from the world in rural Virginia. So I was born at home in this little wooden house that Joe built in the woods. And I was born actually pretty quickly for a first child. So midwives were basically just getting there as my head was coming out. So I had a very natural childbirth, a very natural birth. And yeah, my mom would be the best one to tell that story.
Yes. Well, maybe we should get her on the phone and
sometime. Yeah.
Conversation. Well, I remember when Magical Child came out in 1975. I was opening my center. I remember walking up the front steps carrying the couch with my brother, and somebody mentioning this book, and I thought, oh no, I can't deal with that, because I had recently divorced and left my 2.5-year-old daughter behind in Baltimore and moved to California. So it was very painful for me, this whole concept. It wasn't till the 90s that I actually got into infant wellness and learned, went back and read Joe's book and all of the other material of attachment parenting. So you were in some ways the magical child. I mean, you're almost a cover story or poster girl for his ideas. And there were a number of other books. Magical Child Matures, I think, and don't know if there was one about the magical child becomes a rebellious teenager or not, but what was your early experience like? And I know that wonderful house, and I didn't realize you were born there, but it makes sense. A big stone fireplace that he made with all of the local rocks, and that was the center of the house. So what are your earliest memories? Or do you remember your birth like a few people do?
I don't have clear birth memories. I've heard the story so many times that I have some sort of vague visual impression of it. I think probably from being told, but you know, it's so early, you can't really tell what's your memory and what is
Yeah.
constructed. So, but there is, you know, I do have early impressions of. I mean, I remember all sorts of things, but one of the strongest memories, like when I think of my childhood, is really being outside in nature all around the house and just playing outside with sticks and stones and acorns and running around and building houses in the grass. I mean, that was really, I mean, that's kind of like what I think of when I think of childhood. I should say also that we spent almost half of the year in a meditation ashram, because at the time my father was a devoted follower of Baba Muktananda and then Guru Mai, so we were very involved in Siddha Yoga. So we would spend half the year in Virginia in our rural homestead and the other half in the ashram. So I also had that ashram influence, and those are a lot of early memories as well, which are quite different.
Was that in India?
We spent often winters in India, and then we would also go to, well, we visited different ashrams, some on the West Coast, and my dad actually traveled quite a bit internationally for Siddha Yoga, visiting different places. But we would also spend time in New York at the ashram in New York State, upstate New York, as well, usually in the summer.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there's one in Emeryville, California that I've been to. Did you spend any time there, or is that more recent?
Oh, we did visit there, and I've since been there quite a bit since moving to California.
Yeah, I was going to ask what it was like being carted off to India. What are your first impressions from India?
Well, I remember the heat, you know, coming off the plane, remember the heat and the smell very strongly, and just it being a totally different place. But of course, it was part of my world as well. I kind of took it for granted. It was very different, but we'd been there so many times that I just accepted it, and had a lot of really beautiful experiences there. We would ride in a horse-drawn cart to go to the market, and you know, buy fruits and vegetables there, and see all of the Indian people and kind of the rural people and the farmers and get a little glimpse of their way of life. And I actually have a lot of very fond memories of it.
Great. Now, I know you were homeschooled, so I won't ask you what school was like for you, but how was homeschooling, and also that your niece lived next door, because the two of you would sometimes take care of Sienna.
Right. So yes. Well, my schooling was actually a combination of different things. I did a lot of homeschooling, and I also went to Waldorf school for several years when we were more settled in Virginia. That was 3rd through 6th grade. So I did that, but the majority of it was homeschooling before and after that.
Where was the
a few other
Waldorf
things.
school? I didn't realize
it was. Yeah,
where?
there's one in Charlottesville, Virginia now, and then it was actually in Crozet at the time that I attended
Oh,
it.
right. In Crozet, yeah. I knew there was a Montessori one in Charlottesville, but I'd forgotten about the one in Crozet, yeah. So what was it like being basically having a niece as a sister? Sort of.
Right. Yeah, our family is unique, as all families are in their way. And one of my nieces is 9 months younger than I am, and when we were young children, we grew up playing together a lot. So it was kind of like a extended cousin or just a close next door neighbor, and we were very close, and we shared a lot of great adventures in the woods. It was really wonderful for me having extended family nearby. It gave much. It was sort of much more of an extended family neighborhood kind of feeling rather than just living one family alone in the woods or something.
And now I'm guessing Joe had something to do with his older daughter moving there. Do you know the story of how you happened to have created the extended family? Because it's so crucial to his work and everybody.
Yes, well, it was definitely Joe's idea from the start. He bought that 10-acre plot there, and he saw it as the family plot. He just wanted the whole family come move here, you know. So I think the youngest of his 4 children was actually a teenager when he and my mom moved to Virginia. So she moved there with them and lived there with them for some period of time, and of course went away, and then later was married and came back and built a house, etc.
Yeah, and then she's the one that whose daughter you were.
Yeah, and she had 3 children in all. The oldest I played with a lot, and then the younger 2 were kind of like extended younger siblings. So I definitely had that experience as well, which it definitely enriched my childhood to have that interaction. Otherwise, I would have definitely been an only child.
Yeah, yeah. Now, when did you discover that your dad was a little different than the mainstream 9-to-5 working fathers? What did you notice that early on, and what were your thoughts?
Well, I didn't have a lot of exposure to the mainstream because I didn't go, say, to public school right away. And even when I did, I went to Waldorf school where I still didn't, watch movies or have a lot of media or anything. So I didn't really, I never really thought about it. It was just, this is the way it was. This is Joe, and this is my dad. We all called Joe Joe. None of us called him Dad or Grandpa or anything. So I'm going to refer to him as Joe because that's the way I actually did. So yeah, this was just Joe, and this is what he did. He would fly off in the airplane every few weeks and be gone for a little while and give his talks, and then come back and work in the garden and build stuff, and then we'd go to the ashram. And I guess when I was older, I was certainly aware that it was different, but it wasn't ever like a stark wake-up contrast because I never got starkly immersed in a world that was different than mine till much later.
Now, I'm curious, did you have any Barbies when you were little?
No, well, that's not true. Actually, another friend of mine at the ashram gave me a little baby Barbie. So I did have one. I never had an adult one, but I had the baby Barbie. So I added her to my doll family.
Uh-huh. What were your dolls? Were they Waldorf type cloth dolls, or?
No, I had all sorts of dolls that were more modern. I had cloth and ones too, but my mom was I guess not strictly trained in Waldorf, so it wasn't like I had everything Waldorf style, but it was definitely on the wholesome end of things, I would say.
I would expect such. Yeah. So how did your mom and dad meet? That's a story I've never gotten, and I think.
Well, they met when my mom was actually had just graduated from college, and she had her first teaching job in New England. She graduated from the University of Minnesota, went out to New England, and apparently she told me this part of it just recently. When she went to interview for her position, I think she actually met Joe then, and he was working at that same school. I think he was maybe he was teaching chorus or something, or humanities. I'm not sure which, but she met him then, and then moved there. And I think they worked for briefly at the same school. So
what school was that?
I can't remember. It was a private school. I think it was maybe a private high school or something in upstate in Massachusetts, I believe.
Mhm.
So yeah, they became acquainted there, and yeah, I think so. So they knew each other for quite some time, for quite a span of years
And then
before I was born.
what got them together as a couple then? Do you know that story?
Well, I could never quite. I always feel like there's this punchline that I've sort of missed somehow. Like, come on, Mom, what really happened? Is she's just Midwestern. She doesn't give all the juicy details about, what was the moment when you really thought that, maybe something would happen, or what, So I don't feel like I know everything about it, but I know that my mom really admired Joe. Like she said that she and they also both shared a love of music at the time. My father, which later wasn't as evident, but he studied music, knew quite a lot about music, had a wonderful
I didn't
collection
know
of
that.
records. And my mom was going to conservatory for clarinet at the time, so they would go to concerts together. And my mom would, give him records of the latest, greatest symphony recordings, and so that was definitely part of the romance and the friendship, was the sharing of music. And
This was still in Massachusetts.
I think so. Yeah, they moved. My dad moved a lot, so I don't have the whole timeline, but.
Well, we got to get your mom at some point and pick her brain on the phone. Get
To
that
write down
story.
some of the details, indeed.
So, did your dad play any music, or was he more of a listener?
He did when he was younger. He actually didn't want me to talk about it. Like the things that he told me about music were like, he always told me, don't tell anybody about this, because I think it was something where he had aspirations when he was young that never quite unfolded. And it was maybe even a little painful for him. And, but he was very, very knowledgeable. I think he did play piano at one point and even compose a little bit. And so, I think it's okay if I say it now. I think he would forgive me.
Well, and thank heavens he didn't become a musician, because the world would have been much poorer. Well, who knows? He might have been another famous pianist and changed the world in other ways, but his gifts probably that we've got now wouldn't have manifested if he'd gone into a career in music. So, um, how did they happen to move to Virginia? Do you know uh, that story?
Well, yes. Well, Joe was born in Virginia, so he always loved Virginia and was,
Oh,
looking to return. And basically, they were actually in California before that. And my dad was quite disillusioned by what was happening in the country at the time, the Vietnam War and everything, and wanted to basically drop out of society. And he said he wanted to build a homestead and make so little money that he would never have to pay taxes again, and basically just not participate in what he saw as something he didn't want to be part of. And so he actually was friends with Bob Monroe, who
okay.
started the Monroe Institute. And Bob Monroe had just bought this huge tract of land in Virginia. And so Joe went out to visit Bob and loved it and found a spot. And the story is that Joe traded, as for part of the payment, he traded this little red car he had. I think it was a Ford something that Bob liked. So they made a deal. Joe got the land, and they started their homestead.
Interesting. Do you know what year that was?
I think it was probably 77. I think he started actually constructing the house in 78.
Uh-huh.
Or he actually, it didn't take that long. It only took 3 or 4 months. So the house was constructed in 78.
Really? He did that? That's a big house. That fireplace alone would have taken quite a while.
That's what he always said, that constructing the fireplace took as long as the rest of the house put together. But that was only about 3 months. So probably about 6 months from start to finish.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, excuse me. Let's pick up again with your childhood, and we've gone back to the pre pre-birth story. As a teen, what that would have been when I met you as a young teen. What anything remarkable about your life that we should know about?
Well, as a teenager, we lived in Virginia, and we stopped participating in city yoga when I was 12. So as a teenager, it was I was homeschooled, and we lived full time in Virginia. And the main thing for me is I fell in love with horses. So I had horses, and that was a huge kind of part of my existence and part of my what I was passionate about at the time. And I think, you know, Joe, following his philosophy, just did what he could to support that passion that I had, and got me a horse and built me a barn and built the fence. And so that was really the center of my world, was being with my horses and being in the barn. And of course, I had a lot of other studies. I did a lot of music and art, and then academic studies as well. But I think the horses were really, if I could, I would have spent pretty much all of my time with them. And I'm often asked about homeschooling as a teenager. How did that work? I mean, how were you socialized and everything? And I mean, I think I really wasn't socialized that much. I had a few other friends my age who were homeschooled, but at that point, I was quite, you know, outside of the usual teen experience, because I didn't really have media. We didn't watch media. We didn't have a television, didn't listen to the radio. I didn't listen to pop music. So I was in a really different place than a lot of people my age. And sometimes it was a little hard to relate to them. I was much more comfortable talking to adults than I was to other people my age, except for the circle of a few friends that I had. And I was part of different horse clubs and things where I did interact with people my age, but I was, I think, in a very different kind of frame of mind, just because of not being exposed to the same things that most people were exposed to at that time.
And you went to college at, trying to remember, in...
I graduated from a college called St. John's, which is, it has two campuses. I graduated from the one in Annapolis, Maryland.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking, which is an unusual curriculum, because you study the source rather than using textbooks. That always intrigued me.
Yes, it's basically you study all original texts. There are no textbooks, and it's an all required curriculum that's based on the great book series, like the great books of the Western intellectual tradition. So you're reading a lot of dead white guys the whole time, which is, I mean, for some people that's a drawback, but for me, the reason that I was doing it was to really get kind of an intellectual background on, you know, where this kind of modern frame of reference comes from. And I wanted to be able to really understand it and to be able to think independently and use my own logic. And it really helped me with that. It helped me become even more confident in my own thinking, as opposed to, you know, listening to my dad and just, you know, when I was younger, I would kind of regurgitate what my dad said. and then I thought, no, I have to go and actually learn, what is science really about? Because my dad's mad about a lot of the stuff that's going on in science. I mean, he also sees its value at the same time, but I felt like I had to go and really understand, like, what are the gifts of the Western intellectual tradition, and then also the pitfalls. So that's where I went to school.
And now, I'm trying to remember, there was another young woman in your homeschooling group that I spent.
Erin? Are you thinking of Erin Huey Cummers?
Yeah, did she go to St. John's too?
Yeah, we both went. We homeschooled together, and then we both ended up going to the same college.
That's right, because that's how I learned about it. I was more in contact with her at some point, and she was explaining it to me. And I also seem to recall that you had a sports team that took down the middies at the nearby Naval Academy. And was it badminton or croquet? I can't remember.
It was croquet.
And were you on that team or what, witnessed the?
I did not actually play croquet, I have to say. I was only an observer, but it was a yearly event that all the townspeople would come to as well, the annual croquet match between the Naval Academy and St. John's. And I think I definitely remember St. John's winning on a number of occasions. So we were pretty good.
So you didn't win them all, but you were pretty pretty good at it. So that was a intriguing story. So any other stories about St. John's that you want to toss in here before we move on to the next phase?
Well, one of the things that I remember about St. John's is the bell ringing for seminar. And there was, so twice a week, there was a seminar from 8 to 10 in the evening, and everyone goes to seminar at the same time. So the bell rings and everyone on campus is like leaving their dorm room or the library and walking to seminar. And there's something really unique and kind of special about that, that we were all sharing that experience. And there were just, because we were all reading the same books, it was much easier to say in the dining hall, if you're sitting with someone else who's in your class, or even someone who's in a class below you, you can talk to them about whatever you're studying because we're all reading the same books. So it's really, it creates a different kind of academic community. And there were a lot of cool conversations. Yeah.
Are you reading the same books even if you're in a different year?
Not in a different year, but everyone in that
year.
In the same year, yeah.
Yeah. And what's the enrollment? What was it then? A few hundred?
Yeah, it was probably around 400.
100 per class, roughly?
Roughly. It starts out as more, and then, of course, it's a little less by the time you graduate.
Right. So what came out? Oh, I wanted to go back and ask, you mentioned that your dad left Siddha Yoga, which was before I met him. He was into heart math when I met him. Do you know the circumstances of what led to that transition? Because he was deep into it for many years.
He was very involved, and on the inner circle and doing a lot of actually promotion for Siddha Yoga through giving his talks. And he said there was actually a moment when he realized that it was time to leave. And the way that I recall the story was that he was giving a talk for Siddha Yoga. And all of a sudden, he just experienced, it was like the color just drained out of the scene before him. And he knew in that moment that this was the last talk that he would ever give for Siddha Yoga. It was just something inside him just flipped a switch, and it was like, okay, it's time to do something else now.
And he also,
the other thing he said about it is that it was kind of a recognition that it was time for him to leave this spiritual support system and follow only the inner guidance he had.
Now, I only learned this from reading Michael Mendiz's summations of his various books, because I hadn't read the earlier books, that he had these amazing experiences of working in a computer center while going to college, and basically working while he was asleep and having error-free transcriptions, and a number of what I would call paranormal experiences that he described, and that fit into his work. Can you say any more about that, or what you experienced, or?
Well, he had a number of really remarkable stories of what he had come to call unconflicted behavior.
Oh, yes.
Which is, yeah, and it's exactly that. It's a state of being where you're not subject to the usual laws of cause and effect reality that we take for granted. And he had those experiences when he was younger, maybe in his 20s, maybe 30s. But I questioned him about it because by the time, it wasn't something that he practiced when I knew him. and I questioned him about it too, because of course I was very curious about this. And I said, well, why did you stop? And he, I never thoroughly understood, but it seemed to be that at the time it was a little hard to know what to do with it. And it was almost maybe he left it, yeah, because there wasn't, like, he didn't have any guide, and it felt like maybe it was a little bit dangerous because it could, I don't know, it could turn into black magic or any number of things, you know, sorcery kind of powers, or who knows. But I mean, he did have some teachers and groups and stuff that he participated in, but I got the impression that there was a point when he kind of backed off from it, just because of being unclear about some things.
Yeah, I mean, you could be playing with fire. Yeah.
Yeah, but it is those experiences which I think directly led to the inquiry, which led him to start writing his books.
Yes, cracking the
because
cosmic
he wanted to
egg.
understand what happened. Like, okay, something's going on here. We're not being told the whole story. So what is this? These other capacities that we have.
So do you know how he came up with the title for Cracking the Cosmic Egg? Because that's such a powerful image for a concept, which...
Yeah, at first he had a different working title, which his publisher hated. Or I shouldn't say hated, but his publisher said no. And it was something about parallel lines and maybe something about Jesus. I forget, but it was not that. So I don't know exactly how that was selected how he selected that as a metaphor. I'm not sure what the origin was.
That was before your time, wasn't it? I'm trying to remember.
Definitely.
Whether it was 67 or something. Yeah. Now, you mentioned he knew Bob Monroe, which I could have figured out given that he lived on that land. But and Bob Monroe's Journeys Out of the Body, that was something I was exposed to early on with the recordings. But did they interact around Joe's experiences? Is that what connected them, or do you know anything more about Bob Monroe?
I don't know how they met originally. I think they met in California. So they might have been part of some groups in common or something. And that was in, I think, a much more experimental phase for Bob Monroe. So I imagine that they had some conversations about different kinds of experiences and reality and consciousness and so forth. I'm sure that that's how they became friends, although I don't know the exact details of it. And they did visit a bit as well when they both lived in Virginia.
Yeah, I'd imagine. Well, back to you. We keep jumping in. I keep having questions about Joe and pumping you about them, but want to focus back on you and when you left St. John's. What was the next step in your unfoldment?
Well, I just wanted to explore the world. I had a number of different adventures, spent some time at Arco Santi, that architectural experiment out in Arizona, and met people there who inspired me to go to Europe. I spent a bit of time working on farms in Europe and spent about 5 months on this farm in Italy, learning Italian and learning how to do everything the original way, from shearing sheep to making wine to all those kinds of things. And that was wonderful. I eventually came back to Charlottesville area near where I grew up, and just to put down a little more roots and kind of figure out, okay, now what am I doing with my life? But I think my approach in my early adulthood was definitely more towards just experiencing life, because I wasn't really programmed with that goal-driven kind of reality. Like, this is what you have to do to be successful, become somebody, take on any, job or anything like that that's going to define your life. I wasn't really taught that. So I I just did one thing at a time. Whatever felt like the right thing to do next, I did it. And that eventually led to me moving to California.
And we came to Berkeley first, right?
I did.
I think that was around the time that I wound up back there when I met Yvonne about 10 years ago, or was it early? I think you were already there when I got
Yeah,
there.
it was the fall of 2010 was when I moved there.
Mm-hmm. And what was that like? What did you do in Berkeley? And big jump from Virginia.
It was a big jump. It was a welcome jump. I got there it was actually my second time going to Burning Man. I met a lot of people from the Bay Area, and I was inspired about that being a great place to live because I met people who seemed to be just really interesting and dynamic. And so I just came here in a very spontaneous way. And I loved it. There was pretty much everything that I am interested in, could have been interested in, was happening here in a bigger way than anywhere else I had lived. So I think it was the perfect place for me to come, especially at that age. I was 29.
And so you were an early burner. Well, not real early, but I went in 2006, and only time I've been there, but it blew my mind. And you're a regular burner now, aren't you? Except for this year?
Well, somewhat. I've been about 5 times.
Oh, okay.
So I've had a lot of years where I didn't go, but the times that I have gone, some of them were very pivotal times, especially that one that caused me to, or inspired me to move out here.
Yeah. And what else about Berkeley? And how long were you there? And
I've kind of moved around the Bay Area a lot, mostly between the East Bay, Berkeley, Oakland, and Marin County. So when I first went there, it was just about being there. I worked at a cafe for a little while. I kind of did this and that. And I went to a lot of kind of transformational music festivals around, and I went to ecstatic dance, and I did yoga, and I just took all the classes that I could. And I was painting at the time. I was really into art. So, and making my own clothes and making my own costumes for Burning Man. So, it was just kind of an exciting time of just living and having adventures and being inspired by people I met to learn different things, different healing modalities, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm. Now, at what point did you start getting more interested in your dad's work? And I know you've said you're doing your own writing now, and it's unusual. My daughters both think I'm nuts for my interest. Anything but follow in my footsteps. So how did that transpire that you decided to follow the same path or a similar path?
Yeah, I always felt that I always felt that I am on the same team as my dad. I always felt that in some way I would carry forward something of his, something that some essential piece that I felt was important. But in my younger life, I definitely was not ready to do that. So I took a long step away. There wasn't anything like against, it wasn't like I was rebelling. I just needed a lot of space to be myself and learn who I was, kind of away from my parents and what they had to say about the world. So I would say it's probably in the last 5 years or so that I've started to feel more ready to directly read my dad's books and watch videos of him again. Of course, when I was younger and he was still alive, I went to many of his talks and programs. So at that point, I was absorbing it, and he talked to me a lot too. So he intentionally kind of programmed me with certain things that he wanted me to know and remember that he felt would be guiding principles for me in my life. Whatever I happen to absorb of it, of course, that's up to me. But so I had that, and then kind of just stepped away into my own world for the most part. And now it's really an inquiry for me as to how to interact with his body of work, and what of that is really essential to carry forward and communicate now. I've started a project of reading all his books in order. I've only gotten up to the fourth one, but I do intend to read them all in order so that I can, through that very formal method, see the trajectory of his thought development, because I have a lot of impression from it, but from listening to him talk all those hours and years, but that's kind of all mixed together. So this is a more kind of linear arc of the development of how his thinking evolved over time to be what it was by the time I remember him in my teens, say.
Mm-hmm. And I'll put in a plug for Michael Mendiz's compilation, which I had a chance to look at pre-publication. I don't know where it stands, but for those of us who aren't going to read all, how many, 18 books? What's the total?
I think there's not 9 of them.
Oh, only 9. I'm thinking, yeah.
Only 9? Come on, that bad?
I thought it was more. Anyway, that Michael has taken like 10% out of each book and sewn them together as they evolve, because really it is one book. He just kept writing new chapters, I think, as his thinking unfolded. I know I used to go over to your house and an hour or two, and my head would be spinning after 20 minutes, and I'd take notes, and I'd go back home and take a week to sort it all out, try to integrate what he had been saying. So you growing up with that, it's like, wow, your brain must have gotten a good dose of all those amazing ideas nonstop. So what are your current other interests? Like, why did you pick Hamilton to move to, and what you up to?
Yes, well, Hamilton was simply because I had a friend who was renting a room. So it just worked. It's kind of the way it works in the Bay. If you know somebody who's renting a room, that's a great place to, great connection. So, but it's nice up there and quiet. I've actually since moved out of there. They sold their house. This year has been quite unprecedented for all of us. So I have not had really roots anywhere. I've been traveling on a road trip basically with my boyfriend in a van quite a bit, and I'm in his apartment in San Francisco right now. I've been with my mom some, and so this is a time of inquiry as to where I really want to, if I want to stay here or what, if I want to stay in the Bay or what. So I feel there's a new phase opening up. But as far as like what my other interests and so forth, I think in the past 5 years, I have been quite devoted to yoga. I've always, of course, practiced yoga since I was born, pretty much because of being in the ashram. And I did take a yoga teacher training because it felt pretty natural for me to do that since I had that background. And I resisted it for a while because it just seemed kind of cliche. Oh, everyone thought that I was already a yoga teacher, and I thought, oh, it's so kind of status quo now that I don't even want to do it. But I realized that it would actually be a good exercise in personal growth for me to do it, to get more confident in front of people. I was quite shy when I was younger. So it's been great to teach yoga, and I found a teacher in Berkeley who teaches a very a little known but very in-depth form of hatha yoga, and so I've been studying with him and his wife, and that's been very rewarding. So that's been, I think, a big kind of through line in what I've been learning and offering in the past 5 years or so. And it's a lot about this whole embodiment, but a lot about learning to let the intelligence of the body open up, instead of a lot of systems where you kind of impose intellectual structures on the body, like here's the chakras, and now we're going to envision this color light right here. And it's actually, a lot of that is kind of coming from your mind, and you're projecting onto your body, which isn't bad, it's not wrong, but this is a very different approach where you're cultivating, like you're learning to cultivate subtle energy from the ground up in a very concrete way. And that's what I'm interested in. So
Yeah,
it's great.
interesting. I know at one point you were interested in midwifery. I think you went to a conference in England with your dad, and was that?
I was interested in, I mean, I still am. I think midwifery is, I just have huge respect for anyone who's devoted themselves to being a midwife. And I did study midwifery for a brief time, thinking that that would be a way to have a really powerful impact. So I still love birth. Anytime I watch a video of birth, you know, especially home birth, I pretty much cry.
Mhm.
So, but birth is also a really strong metaphor for a lot of life, especially being a woman. I feel that metaphor is very potent, and so I realized that there are other ways to be a midwife. So I feel that I'm still devoted to being a midwife, but perhaps it's not working with individual women giving birth, but it is like something that is trying to be born in our culture that I want to help be born.
Great. Uh-huh. Any other interests? You had a guitar in your hands when we first connected. I don't know if we can get you to play a song to close with, or
I've always played some music. My mom is a musician, of course, and so there was always music going on in our house. And I grew up playing the violin, and I still play a little bit. I'm not very good, but I enjoy it. So it's a hobby, a pastime, and I've always liked to have my hand in something creative, just for my own satisfaction. So sometimes that's been drawing or painting, and recently I've picked up the guitar. I actually have some of my older nephews are very good guitarists and songwriters, very proficient. I'm just starting to learn the guitar, but I do like to play. So that's kind of a new project that I'm playing and learning to make up songs. And that's just a place where I really light up, and it's something that I do pretty much just for me. I may share it more in the future, but I love music, and I love to always feel like there's something that I'm creating, that I'm building with. I just like to be involved with some kind of creative process. It's very interesting to me.
a surprise, surprise.
Right.
Well, I feel like we've gotten a good taste of what it was like to grow up in this unusual environment. And I've also noticed the sun is setting, but you're still visible.
Yeah, I wish I had a light to direct this way, but I only have
Well,
the overhead, unfortunately.
yeah, we can still see you, but it is later there. So as we hope future generations will have access to these recordings, what sort of thing would you like to pass on to, well, even your generation, because you're probably the youngest person I've interviewed so far, but many of us are in our 70s and 80s, and some have died since I interviewed them. But what wisdom would you like to convey, and any other final thoughts? Or anything I missed along the story line too.
Well, we could tell the story so many ways, so many times, and there would always be a different nuance to it, right? So I think I trust what we've spoken is the right thing to talk about today. But I would say, it's really strange. At a time that seems so dark and dire, I actually feel a tremendous energy of, I don't really want to call it hopefulness, but like there is an energy present in me that feels like there's also this renewal, this possibility for renewal that's always present for us. So I don't pay as much attention to the feeling of doom and gloom. And one of the things that I'm really passionate about right now is, especially being in the Bay Area, I'm very aware of this sort of movement towards AI and artificial intelligence, and this mythology that we are eventually going to become computers, right? We're going to become robots, or everyone's going to have their implanted chip, and it's all about that sort of having all this information at your fingertips. And a lot of it's pretty dark, and a lot of people feel like it's just inevitable that that's going to happen, whether we like it or not. And some people think it's great, and some people may not think it's great, but they still think that they're maybe stuck in that trajectory. And, or, you know, there's a lot of narratives out there that just don't really seem like what any of us really want. And I just really want to say that that doesn't have to be our story. And that is not the only possible future. And the thing that we have that can make a difference is already here. It's already inside us. It's like our own capacities. It's built into our DNA. It's built into the way that our minds naturally function. So if we can just wake up to what we already are and support like our natural intelligence to develop in the way that it was designed to, we can have, and we will have, a dramatically different world and a dramatically different reality. So I was just thinking about that this morning. It's like, I don't even believe that it's about, solving the world's problems. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of problems out there that need to be addressed, and all the inequalities and social justice. Yes, that is all very, very important. But there's a way that I think that there's something about shifting the frame of reference. When we shift our frame of reference, and when we open up to like the larger kind of more holistic intelligences, then these things that we see as problems can shift into into another frame where they can actually start to, we can start to just do things differently. We can start to do things that really work, like natural childbirth and holistic education. These things work. We can just start doing it instead of trying to, fix the systems out there that are broken and probably beyond repair in a lot of cases. Let's build new ones. We can do that. We have everything we need to do that. The government's kind of a problem, but other than that.
Well said. And I'm inspired by Strauss and Howe's theory of the fourth turning, that every 90 years we go through a massive upheaval, and we're in that process right now of what they call the fourth turning. And I hope I live to see us come out the other side, and that it is a vision, or that what our visions, and I share yours, that these dark forces will be put at bay. I mean, we're always going to have samsara on the earth plane, and there'll be struggles and things to deal with, but got a particularly big one right now for sure. And I think it's an opportunity that our generations are challenged with. So I'm delighted to know that you're out there doing what you're doing, and I'm appreciating you taking the time to share both your life and how it reflects on Joe's life and what he meant to me and so many hundreds of thousands of people. So thank you again, Shakti. This has been great. I'm going to end the recording. And so